So this was the conclusion to the Baratie arc, and of course Luffy versus Don Krieg, and this was one of my favourite arcs so far in the series, and also one of my favourite fights. Firstly, let's talk about the fight itself and what it meant. A big theme in this arc, or through this series so far, I guess, has been determination and the willingness to put yourself in harm's way, and even to the point of death, in order to achieve your goals and your dreams. And that went for both Luffy and Don Krieg, funny enough, because although Don Krieg is a terrible person and he's basically irredeemable, he still has this ultimate goal of being the strongest. And it's very much shown at the end of this fight when Don Krieg is unconscious, yet he's still standing up and proclaiming to be the strongest and that he can't lose. That's just a pure will of determination. And of course, Luffy is the same. He's so determined to become the king of the pirates, and nothing will ever stop him. And it went to show in this fight as well. To me, this was like a fight between, pure strength in Luffy and then, cunning and weapons by Don Krieg. And it was really interesting to look at which one would prevail. Of course, in the end, it was Luffy, but he was in some pretty tight spots every now and then. But the conclusion to this fight was insane. Odd Don Krieg had these insane weapons, literally like an explosive spear and this armor that seemed impenetrable. Luffy just had his pure will, his pure determination, and the way he was just smashing his armor to bits, eventually when he finally broke through that armor, was so insanely satisfying. I'll never get tired of watching One Piece villains get beaten up. Like, it's just something about it, bro. And Luffy landing those punches, oh mate, it's literally the most satisfying thing ever. But even after Luffy does do that, and it seems like the fight is coming to an end, Don Krieg comes out with like a new weapon, which is essentially like a steel net to drag Luffy into the sea, which of course we know he can't swim because of the devil fruit. But even then, Luffy uses his mind to stretch his legs out and essentially put Don Krieg's neck in like a vice grip, and then like give him the wildest pile driver I've ever seen. Like, fucking hell, that would break the neck of a rhino, what he did there. It was insane. But the conclusion to this fight was awesome. And at the end, Luffy did eventually fall into the sea because he was in the net. And ironically, Sanji is the one that had to jump in and rescue him, just like Zeph did back when Sanji fell into the ocean when he was a kid. And I think there was something really poetic about that. And as Sanji was saving Luffy, we're seeing visions of, when Zoro was fighting Mihawk and how he refused to give up. And then, of course, what he just saw with Luffy. And then he saw visions of the All Blue, his goal, what his motivation, his treasure, I guess. Or I suppose not his treasure. I suppose the Baratie is sort of his treasure along with Zeph's. But it's the thing that's driving him forward. Like I said, it's determination. And that's such a huge part of this arc, it feels like, and One Piece as a whole. And that's what makes these characters so fun to follow, like their journeys. It makes you so invested in it, at least it does for me. And something tells me this won't be the last we see of Don Krieg, because at the end of the episode, Gin essentially takes Don Krieg away and says he's going to meet them again in the Grand Line, but under his own motivation, because he said that Don Krieg motivation eventually became his, but he wants to go to the Grand Line now off his own back, basically, off his own motivation, determination, his own reasons. And I feel like we'll see them again one day, and I think that's going to be very cool. At some point later in the series, we'll get to see these characters again and see sort of how far they've come and how they've changed and everything like that. But yeah, the Baratie arc in general has been so good and such a roller coaster. I've absolutely loved it. One of my favorite arcs of the series so far, probably my favorite. I don't know, this one and the arc with Captain Kuri, Syrup Village, are both amazing. But to have two arcs like this back to back, God, One Piece is something else, bro. It's actually, I can't believe it's taken me so long to watch. So I imagine Sanji's going to join the crew now, as he is the chef, and that's sort of what they were looking for coming into this. Like, I completely forgot that was even a thing. I assume Luffy's not going to have to be a chore boy anymore, because, he made that deal with Zeph that if he drove off Don Krieg, he could leave. So, I hopefully they can leave next time. But at the very end of the episode, before the credits roll, we saw Nami again, and she was crying because she was saying, I hope I get to see you guys again. So she hasn't betrayed them or anything like that. I'm sure she has her reasons for doing what she's doing, and I'm not too sure what that is yet. She said something about wanting to be free, and then she mentioned a character called Bellamere. I don't know who that is, but I imagine we'll find out, and I imagine it's also something to do with that Arlong. So, maybe that's the next arc, something to do with Arlong and Nami and stuff. So we haven't really had much backstory on Nami so far, or information on her, so I'm very intrigued to learn about her. Because, all the characters in this series are so rich in their backstories and their motivations and just their characters as a whole. So I want to learn more about Nami for sure. But anyway, that was the Baratie arc. Absolutely incredible. I've got nothing else to say. I can't wait to see what happens next. So let's do it.